evidence for your truthfulness?
Yes, I believe so.
Can you describe the attack?
My neck was cut from one side to the other.
Can we still see it?
It was said on a stand that by the doctor that did the surgery that the carotid artery was actually nicked, but it was not cut the whole way through. And they said had it been cut 2 millimeters more, which is a very, very tiny amount, that I would have bled to death within minutes.
We wouldn't sit.
I would not be sitting here today.
Yes.
I was stabbed.
She sat right on here and said something that was never said on the stand. The doctor did not say on the stand that the carotid artery was cut. He did not say that had it gone any farther, she would have died. And I asked Danelle why Darlie is telling us that happened, and she could not give me an answer. Give Danelle Fugate her props for coming out and speaking up for her sister, Darlie Routier, who was convicted in 1996, capital murder in Rowlett, Texas, and now sits on death row. Her family's been trying really hard to explain her innocence, and Danelle is now taking to TikTok to give her words on the case. Danelle has told her TikTok followers that Dr. Alex Santos, who attended to Darlie in the emergency room when they did the exploratory surgery, it wasn't emergency surgery, it was just exploratory, that he never described the wounds as superficial. And I said, well, yes, he did. She said, yeah, well, they're not in it's not in his medical records. Okay? But it is in his medical records. At the beginning of this testimony, Toby Shook, the prosecutor, handed Dr. Santos the medical records, and it stated in this, so he can refer to them. So they had the medical records there. And Danelle was telling me, well, the lawyers don't know medical terminology and stuff like that. But they do know how to read, and they do know the difference of a superficial wound and a deep wound. Danelle has said that he said they were deep wounds, and here on the stand he says they're not, with those medical records sitting right in front of him. And even I have learned something new here today, because I always thought the carotid sheath was cut. So just by digging in, sometimes we can find out something a little bit different. But this is the testimony right here, and I'm going to start it right here. He's explaining the neck wound cut. Yumi! Shh, my dog. He's explaining the neck wound cut, right? They didn't measure, blah, 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 blah. All right. And it went from the right to the left. Can't tell you where it started, but it extended from one side to the other, just past the midline of the left side. Now, you say that it went to what's called the platysma. Is that right? Platysma, yes. And did you measure how deep wound that was? No. We really don't measure wounds because it doesn't matter the depth of the injury. What matters in relationship is in relationship to the other structures, like the platysma in the neck. That's kind of a defining boundary. If it goes past the platysma, it's considered a deep wound. In that case, we may have to do further exploration and open up the wound more. If it goes to the platysma, then it's called a superficial wound. Okay, so in layman's terms, this wound cut through, I guess, the skin and fat. Is that correct? Is that right? Correct. Okay, and the little veins that are contained in the skin and the fat. Correct. But it didn't penetrate the muscles that's below the skin and fat. Correct. It did not. And in your terms, you call that a superficial wound. Is that right? Yes, sir. The medical description is that's a superficial wound. And you can't tell that right there in emergency, blah, blah, blah. I also asked Danelle why Darlie on Werner Herzog's On Death Row. You can see this on Rumble. On Werner Herzog's On Death Row, what Darlie said was to Herzog was the doctor said on the stand that the knife actually nicked the carotid artery, and that had I have not gotten there sooner, I would have bled out and died immediately. So I asked Danelle why her sister said that. She said, well, Darlie doesn't know medical terms and things like that, and maybe they just base it on, that she doesn't know medical terms. Yeah, but Darlie's had 27 years, and she's fighting for her life. She has access to anytime she wants her legal stuff, she can get it. That's a right that prisoners have to their legal stuff. She just chalked it up to, well, Darlie didn't know what the carotid artery was. Well, my point would be, she said the doctor said this on the stand. Right? I said, well, Darlie does know how to read and write correctly, right? And she's like, yeah, And I said, well, she was there in the courtroom, right? So she knows what was said and wasn't said. And Dr. Santos never said that. He never said that it was a deep wound. She was telling people that he said it was a deep wound, and it's not. He did refer to them as superficial twice. All right, and then she was talking a little bit about priority 1, which is possible that she was priority 1 because of the attack. I don't know what priority she was when they took her to the ambulance, but I do know that her mother told us that they wanted to get airlift in a helicopter in there to fly her out real quick because she was in such bad shape, but they couldn't land it in that cul-de-sac, that half cul-de-sac. That's what her mother told us years ago. Now, let me see here. I'm going to read down just a little bit. Danelle also said she had lots and lots and lots and lots of stitches. The doctor says we put in what is called a subcuticular stitch underneath the skin and we closed it up. Those are not actively bleeding. When she got into surgery, she was not actively bleeding. Could you tell how deep this wound was in the clavicle? No active bleeding on that wound there on her shoulder. That is also considered a superficial wound. This is coming from the man who treated her. She's trying to say, well, his medical records didn't say that, but he said that on the stand. It seems to me like what he's saying on the stand is more crucial than what he writes in his medical reports, because he took an oath. And he can be found with perjury, according to her. No active bleeding in her other wound. Okay, if she just had this wound here on this smaller wound on this clavicle and the wounds at arm, would you take her into surgery? Those wounds can be examined and probably closed up in the emergency room and sent home. Just sewed up and sent home. Did you see any other major cuts on her that needed to be tended to? No. Any other major cuts? No. We examined her when she was up in the operating room. Since she was under anesthetic, we didn't want to cause any discomfort. We examined all 3 of those wounds I've talked about. We repaired those. We looked to make sure that no other stab wounds to her back or anywhere else. And Danelle did make a comment about bruising that could be missed. And she said, well, they didn't look over their whole body. These nurses, but it says right here that they did. We did not find any other injury. Nothing about nicks under the chin. You look pretty close for any other injuries. Is that right? Yes, sir. Just verifying the wounds. Then she's turned over to Mosty. Now, the supporters in this case used to say that the jurors were just uneducated, stupid people that just didn't like Darlie, they were just uneducated hillbillies. Well, Richard Mosty is from Kerrville. He was born and raised there, and his exact statement was that these jurors are some of the best people in the world to make this decision. I'm not going to go into his testimony, but that's the testimony of Alex Santos, who actually treated her. And from what she's saying on TikTok and this testimony are two different things. Two totally different things.